Michael Green's old sedan rumbled along the winding road that cut through the dense thornfield forest. As the sun dipped below the horizon, shadows stretched across the road, and an unsettling mist began to rise from the underbrush. Michael peered through his windshield, watching the fog swirl mysteriously around his car, feeling as though he was driving straight into the heart of a ghost story. Thornfield was a small, secluded town that time seemed to have forgotten. The residents were few, and they shared a bond strengthened by the isolation of their community and the legends that haunted their lands. Michael had heard stories about Thornfield's eerie calm and its crown jewel of decay, the Alder Mansion, long before he decided to relocate from the bustling city in search of peace and inspiration for his novel. Upon reaching the town, Michael's first stop was the Thornfield Inn, a quaint establishment that served as the communal hub. As he entered, a warm bell chimed above the door, slicing through the soft murmur of conversations. The interior was rustic, with wooden beams across the ceiling and a large fireplace that filled the room with a gentle, amber glow. The locals, a mix of curious and wary faces, turned towards him as he approached the bar to check in. Michael sensed a shift in the atmosphere, the weight of unspoken stories hanging in the air. "Evening, you must be Mr. Green," greeted the innkeeper, Mrs. Holloway, a stout woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile. "Heard you might be staying with us for a spell. What brings you to Thornfield?" "Just looking for a quiet place to write and unwind," Michael replied, returning her smile. "Well, you've picked the right place for quiet, though unwind might depend on how you feel about our local tales," she chuckled, handing him his room key. As Michael settled into the bar area for a meal, a group of older men at the corner table eyed him with a mixture of interest and reservation. One of them, a grizzled old man with a thick beard and a cap pulled low over his eyes, finally walked over to Michael. "You're the writer fella, ain't ya?" he asked in a gravelly voice, pulling out a chair without waiting for an invitation. "You look like someone who'd appreciate a good story. Ever heard of the Alder Mansion?" Michael nodded, intrigued. "I have, actually. It's partly why I came here. I'm fascinated by ghost stories and old legends." The man's eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and something darker, perhaps caution. "Then you're in for a treat, or a curse, depending on how brave you are. That house ain't just old, it's ancient, filled with spirits more real than you and I." As the night wore on, tales of the Alder Mansion flowed as freely as the drinks. Each story was steeped in tragedy, disappearances, unexplained noises, and sightings of specters so detailed they chilled Michael to the bone. The mansion wasn't just a relic, it was the heart of Thornfield's haunted history. Driven by a mix of determination and an undeniable spike of adrenaline, Michael decided that his first week in Thornfield would be spent unraveling the mysteries of the Alder Mansion. Little did he know, the mansion had its own plans, and the shadows that lingered there were not just remnants of the past, but living, breathing entities waiting for someone like him to walk through its doors. The following morning, Michael awoke in his quaint room at the Thornfield Inn to the sound of rain tapping gently against the window. The gray light of dawn barely penetrated the thick cloud cover, casting a gloomy pall over everything. As he made his way downstairs for breakfast, the conversation from the night before replayed in his mind. The Alder Mansion, with its whispered horrors and unsolved mysteries, beckoned him. The inn's dining room was nearly empty, save for Mrs. Holloway bustling about and a couple of locals enjoying their morning coffee. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air, mingling with the earthy scent of rain-soaked ground coming through the open window. "Morning, Mr. Green. Did you sleep well, or did our ghost stories keep you up?" Mrs. Holloway asked with a knowing smile as she placed a plate of eggs and toast before him. "Like a log, surprisingly," Michael replied, though his restless night said otherwise. "I'm actually thinking of taking a walk to the Alder Mansion today, see it for myself." Mrs. Holloway paused, her expression turning serious. "Just be careful, Mr. Green. That place, it's not just old, it's got a heaviness to it. Bad things happen there. If you must go, take this with you." She handed him a small, silver charm. "It's supposed to ward off evil spirits. Can't hurt to have a bit of protection." Grateful, Michael pocketed the charm and finished his breakfast. As he prepared to leave, a group of younger locals entered the inn. They overheard his plans and quickly surrounded him, their eyes alight with a mix of excitement and challenge. "You're really going up to Alder Mansion?" one of them asked, a tall young man with an eager grin. "You know, we've got a bit of a tradition around here. Anyone new to Thornfield who's brave enough to explore the mansion must complete a dare." "And what's this dare?" Michael asked, intrigued. "You have to take something from the mansion and bring it back. Proves you were really there," a second local chimed in, her tone playful yet slightly ominous. Michael considered this. He wasn't superstitious, but he respected the local traditions and the underlying currents of fear associated with the place. "All right, I'll do it. What should I take?" "Something from the main hall. There's an old grandfather clock there, if it hasn't been stolen or broken." "Bring back one of its hands," suggested the first man. Armed with his camera, notebook, and the silver charm, Michael set out under the watchful eyes of the townspeople. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy with moisture, thickening the fog that seemed to emanate from the direction of the mansion. As he walked through the outskirts of town and into the embrace of the forest that hid Alder Mansion from casual sight, Michael felt an increasing sense of isolation. The path was overgrown, the forest reclaiming the land bit by bit. The further he walked, the more pronounced the silence became. No birds chirped, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Finally, the trees parted to reveal the imposing structure of Alder Mansion. It stood defiantly against the elements, its once grand features now marred by time and neglect. The mansion's windows stared down like hollow eyes, and the front door hung slightly ajar, as though the house itself was inviting him in. Taking a deep breath and clutching the silver charm in his pocket, Michael stepped through the gate that seemed to creak a final warning. The challenge was set, and the mansion awaited, its dark secrets hidden within the shadows of its walls. The rusty gate to Alder Mansion groaned under Michael's touch, its hinges protesting as if reluctant to allow another visitor to enter its domain. The grounds were overgrown, the once manicured lawns now a wild tangle of weeds and shrubs. Vines crawled up the stone walls of the mansion, gripping the masonry like desperate fingers. It was as though nature itself was trying to reclaim the land, burying the memories of the house beneath a blanket of green. Michael paused just inside the gate, his eyes scanning the facade of the mansion. The building was a stark silhouette against the cloudy sky, its windows dark and empty, giving the impression of a blind and brooding creature. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. It was a visceral reaction to the palpable sense of despair that seemed to seep from the very bricks. Pulling his jacket tighter around him, he forced himself to move forward. Each step on the gravel path crunched loud in the oppressive silence, the sound unnaturally crisp. As he approached the front door, he noticed it was slightly ajar, swinging gently as if caught in a non-existent breeze. The notion that the mansion was somehow alive and aware of his presence sent a shiver down his spine. Steeling his nerves, Michael pushed the door open, the creak echoing through what must have been a grand entrance hall. Inside, the air was cool and musty, filled with the scent of decay and old wood. His footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, the sound bouncing off the high ceilings and grand staircase that dominated the space. The entrance hall was lined with portraits of the Alder family, their faces stern and unforgiving, eyes seeming to follow him as he moved. Dust motes danced in the beams of light that filtered in through the dirty windows, the particles swirling as if disturbed by his intrusion. Michael's camera hung heavy around his neck, and he lifted it now, documenting his journey. He snapped pictures of the grand staircase, the chandelier that hung low from the ceiling, covered in cobwebs, and the portraits that seemed to watch him with silent judgment. As he ventured deeper into the mansion, he came upon the main hall. It was a vast room with a high ceiling supported by dark wooden beams. An enormous fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel adorned with trinkets and faded photographs. Opposite the fireplace, the grandfather clock stood as promised, its face dusty but noble in its continued assertion of time in a place seemingly forgotten by it. Michael approached the clock, noting the intricate carvings on its wooden case, scenes of hunting and revelry, a stark contrast to the current desolation. He reached out hesitantly, half expecting the clock to chime and announce his presence to whatever might still reside in the mansion. His fingers wrapped around one of the clock hands, and with a gentle tug, it came free. Just as the hand disconnected, a sound stopped Michael dead in his tracks, the faint, yet distinct, sound of a child's laughter echoing through the halls. It was playful and chillingly out of place. His heart thudded in his chest as he turned slowly, camera poised, half in fear and half in hope of capturing whatever ghostly presence might be revealing itself. The laughter faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Michael in the unsettling silence once more. With the clock hand secure in his pocket next to the silver charm, he knew he should leave, but curiosity tugged at him stronger than fear. He decided to explore just a little further, unaware that the mansion had more secrets to unveil, each darker than the last. With the clock hand safely tucked away, a tangible reminder of the mansion's eerie reality, Michael hesitated. The laughter still echoed in his mind, a ghostly residue that chilled him to the bone. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, his curiosity was piqued, driving him to delve deeper into the mansion's heart. He moved slowly through the main hall, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, casting large, ominous shadows on the walls. The air grew colder as he ventured away from the relative safety of the entrance hall. He could almost feel the dense history of the mansion pressing in around him, each room holding its breath, watching him with unseen eyes. Michael entered what appeared to be a dining room, the table set as if the Alder family might return at any moment for dinner. Fine china and crystal glasses were laid out, untouched and gathering dust. A grand chandelier hung overhead, its crystals dulled by years of neglect, and yet it retained a mournful elegance. On the far side of the room, a series of doors suggested further rooms yet to be explored. Michael chose the one slightly ajar, leading to what looked like a study. The room was filled with bookshelves, a heavy desk, and more faded portraits. Papers were strewn about, and several books lay open as if they had been hastily consulted and then abandoned. On the desk, a journal lay open, the ink faded but still legible. Michael leafed through it, discovering it belonged to Jonathan Alder, the patriarch of the family. The entries started ordinarily enough, detailing business dealings and family events. But as he flipped through the pages, the tone shifted. Jonathan wrote of strange occurrences in the house, voices that couldn't be traced, figures seen from the corner of the eye, and a growing sense of dread that something was profoundly wrong. Compelled to understand more, Michael read about Jonathan's increasing paranoia and fear for his family's safety. He wrote of calling upon a medium to cleanse the house, a decision that seemed to have precipitated a disastrous turn of events. The final entry was frantic, a scrawled plea for anyone reading to leave the house before they, too, became trapped by whatever darkness had claimed the Alders. As Michael absorbed the words, a cold wind swept through the room, rustling the pages and sending a shiver down his spine. It felt as if the house itself was reacting to the secrets being uncovered, or perhaps it was merely another draft through the broken windows. Michael couldn't be sure. Deciding he had tempted fate enough and recalling the townspeople's warnings, he made his way back towards the entrance. However, as he passed the grand staircase, he noticed a light flickering upstairs, a soft, pulsing glow that hadn't been there before. His resolve faltered. Logic argued for a swift exit, but the part of him that was a writer, a seeker of stories, urged him to investigate. With a mixture of trepidation and thrill, Michael ascended the stairs, each step creaking under his weight. The light led him to a closed door at the end of the upstairs hallway. Pausing, he listened, but the only sound was his own breathing and the thud of his heartbeat loud in his ears. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped into what would be the most terrifying yet enlightening experience of his night in the Alder mansion. The door swung open with a low groan, revealing a room bathed in soft, eerie light. Michael stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the glow emanating from several candles that flickered on a dusty dressing table. It was a bedroom, grander than the rest, likely the master chamber of the mansion. The heavy curtains were drawn, and a large, canopied bed dominated the room, its linens disheveled and layered with dust. Michael's flashlight scanned the room, casting sharp, darting shadows against the walls. He approached the dressing table where an array of vintage perfume bottles and a silver hand mirror lay scattered among the candles. The air held a faint scent of lavender, oddly fresh amidst the mustiness. As he reached out to touch the mirror, a chill swept through the room, and the candles flared as if reacting to his presence. Behind him, the mirror reflected not just his image but seemed to flicker with the hand of another figure standing in the room's corner. Michael spun around, but there was nothing. When he looked back at the mirror, the image had vanished. His heart raced, not just from fear but from the adrenaline of the encounter. He was no longer just a visitor, he felt like a participant in the mansion's ongoing story. His attention was then drawn to a painting above the fireplace, depicting a stern woman in Victorian attire. Her eyes, dark and intense, seemed to follow him as he moved. Plaques beneath the portraits identified her as Eleanor Alder, the matriarch. Underneath her intense gaze, a sense of sorrow filled the air, as if the room still held her sadness. Near the fireplace, a small door caught his eye, partly hidden by heavy drapes. Curious, Michael pushed the drapes aside and opened the door, revealing a narrow spiral staircase leading down into darkness. The air grew colder as he descended, the narrow beam of his flashlight his only guide. At the bottom, he found himself in a small, stone-walled room that felt more like a cellar than part of the main house. Shelves lined the walls, filled with strange artifacts and old books. In the center of the room, a large chest piqued his interest. It was ornately carved, the wood aged and warped, but firmly locked. Searching the shelves for a key, Michael instead found a leather-bound book. Dusting it off, he opened it to find it was Eleanor's diary, filled with elegant handwriting. As he flipped through, passages jumped out at him, revealing Eleanor's growing concern over her husband's obsession with the occult. She wrote of strange rituals performed in this very room, her fear palpable in the increasingly erratic script. The last entry was desperate, dated the night before the family vanished. It spoke of a final ritual meant to cleanse the house, but feared it would instead unleash something terrible. The writing ended abruptly, the ink smudged as if dropped in haste. Michael's skin prickled with the realization that he was standing in the heart of the mansion's darkness, the room where the Alder family's fate was sealed. The weight of the tragedy felt oppressive, the air thick with the echo of past horrors. Hearing a faint noise, Michael turned to see the shadows along the walls seeming to shift and twist. The atmosphere was charged, a whisper of the past energies still lingering. He knew it was time to leave, to escape the heavy darkness of the cellar before the mansion claimed him as another lost soul. With Eleanor's diary tucked under his arm, Michael ascended back to the ground floor, each step away from the cellar lightening the oppressive atmosphere. He exited the master bedroom, heading back towards the grand staircase, the mansion seemingly sighing in resignation as he moved. Michael had barely caught his breath from the cellar's chilling revelations when the mansion compelled him onward. As he approached the grand staircase to leave, a soft, almost pleading whisper seemed to float down from the upper floors. The sound was not just in his head, it was as real as the creaking floorboards beneath his feet. Despite his better judgment, the pull to follow the whisper was irresistible, drawing him up the staircase with an almost magnetic force. The upper floor was markedly different from the rest of the mansion. Here, the air was colder, the shadows deeper and more menacing. Long, heavy drapes hung from the windows, blocking out any remnants of outside light and casting each hallway into near-total darkness. His flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing doors that lined the corridor, each one closed and silent. Following the whispers, Michael found himself standing before a large oak door, slightly ajar. He pushed it open slowly, the hinges groaning under the weight of disuse. Inside, he discovered a room that starkly contrasted with the decay he had seen elsewhere in the mansion. This room was meticulously preserved, as if frozen in time. It was a seance room, complete with a large, round table at its center surrounded by high-backed chairs. Each chair faced inward, as if its occupants had just stepped away. Candles, long since burned out, were scattered around the table, and in the center, a crystal ball sat atop a dark velvet cloth, its surface cloudy and opaque. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with ancient tomes and artifacts related to the occult and spiritualism. A heavy atmosphere of anticipation hung in the air, as if the room were waiting for its participants to return and continue their otherworldly communication. Compelled by a mix of fear and fascination, Michael approached the table. The room seemed to react to his presence, the air growing even chiller, a sense of expectation prickling at his skin. He reached out hesitantly to touch the crystal ball, and as his fingers made contact, the air in the room shifted. A sudden gust whispered through the room, stirring the pages of books and fluttering the candles. Then, unexpectedly, the candles lit themselves, casting a dim, flickering light across the room. The crystal ball cleared, and within its depths, a mist began to swirl, coalescing into a vague shape. Michael's heart raced as he realized he was not alone. The room was alive with the energies of those who had once sought to breach the veil between worlds. A voice, soft and ethereal, filled the room. It was not just in his mind, it was as real as the candlelight, as tangible as the chill that enveloped him. "Help us," it whispered, a plea from the beyond. "Free us from this binding." Michael, overcome by the intensity of the experience, struggled to maintain his composure. He had come looking for a story, but he had found a genuine supernatural encounter. He knew then that he could not leave the mansion yet. Whatever had happened here, whatever forces the Alder family had unleashed or encountered, were reaching out to him for release. Driven by a newfound determination to help, Michael set about searching the room for clues. He examined the books, many of which were on spiritualism and ritual magic, looking for anything that might explain how to break whatever ties bound the spirits to the mansion. As he searched, the voice continued to whisper, guiding him, pleading with him to complete what had been started so many years ago. In the flickering candlelight of the seance room, Michael felt an acute sense of urgency. The whispers, now clearer and more desperate, guided his every move. As he scanned the shelves, his fingers brushed against a particularly ancient leather-bound book. It almost seemed to fall into his hands of its own accord. Opening it, he found detailed accounts of spiritual ceremonies and rituals purported to contact, or even release, spirits bound to earthly realms. The book was marked at a chapter titled The Ritual of Release, which detailed a complex ceremony involving specific incantations and an arrangement of symbolic items around the seance table. Michael's rational mind struggled with the reality of what he was considering, but the ethereal pleas continued, urging him forward. He resolved to attempt the ritual, driven by a compulsion he could neither explain nor resist. Setting the book on the table, Michael gathered the necessary items from around the room: candles to represent light and guidance, salt to purify and protect, and an amethyst crystal from the shelf to channel energies. He arranged them as instructed, his hands steady despite the trembling anticipation that filled him. As he began reciting the incantations from the book, the air in the room thickened, the temperature dropping so sharply that his breath misted in the candlelight. The crystal ball began to glow softly, its light pulsing in rhythm with his chanting. The shadows cast by the candle flames danced wildly across the walls, as though alive with spectral energy. Midway through the ritual, the crystal ball's glow intensified, casting a stark, bluish light over the table. The room vibrated with a palpable energy, and the whispering voices crescendoed into a harmonious chant. It was then that the apparition appeared. Materializing above the seance table was the figure of a woman, ethereal and translucent. Her features were delicate, her expression one of profound sadness and longing. She wore a gown that flowed around her like mist, and her eyes, when they met Michael's, were filled with a haunting desperation. "I am Eleanor," the apparition spoke, her voice echoing around the room. "You have heeded our call, and for that, we are grateful. This house, bound by dark energies from a failed ritual, traps us between worlds. We seek release to move beyond and find peace." Michael, overwhelmed by the presence of Eleanor, struggled to maintain his focus. "How can I free you?" he asked, his voice steady despite the awe and fear that gripped him. "The ritual you have begun must be completed at midnight, under the light of the full moon. Only then can the binding be undone," Eleanor instructed. Her form flickered like a candle flame in the wind, her strength waning. "Will it release all the spirits?" Michael asked, concerned about the implications of his actions. "Yes, but beware. The one who bound us here, Jonathan, my husband, did so out of grief and madness. His spirit may not wish to be freed and could resist, she warned. Eleanor's image began to dissolve, her time to manifest running short. Complete the ritual, free us, and protect yourself, for not all spirits seek the light, she whispered, her last words fading into the ether. With the apparition gone and the room falling silent once more, Michael felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Armed with knowledge and driven by a newfound resolve, he prepared for the ritual that would either free the spirits of Alder Mansion or unleash further darkness upon himself. As Michael left the seance room, the mansion seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the walls creaking softly, the shadows shifting as if watching his every move. The echoes of Eleanor's warnings played over in his mind, adding a sense of foreboding to his already daunting task. Returning to his temporary quarters at the Thornfield Inn to prepare, Michael found himself unable to rest. The gravity of what he was about to attempt weighed heavily on him, casting long shadows across his thoughts. He tossed and turned in bed, plagued by vivid nightmares that seemed to bleed over from the mansion's haunted past into his sleeping consciousness. In his dreams, he was back in the mansion, but it was alive, breathing, and watching him. He wandered through endless corridors, each room revealing a different scene of the Alder family's life and sudden, tragic end. He saw Eleanor, as beautiful and sad as her apparition, pleading with Jonathan to stop the rituals. But Jonathan, driven by a wild, grief-stricken obsession, would not be swayed. His actions grew more desperate and dangerous, culminating in a chaotic ritual that spiraled out of control, enveloping the family in a blinding flash of light, then darkness. Michael awoke with a start, his heart racing, the images from his dreams lingering in his mind like afterimages. He knew these visions were more than just dreams, they were messages, or perhaps memories, imprinted in the very fabric of the mansion and now reaching out to him. Determined to put an end to this haunting cycle, Michael reviewed the steps of the ritual Eleanor had described. He gathered his materials, candles for protection, salt to form a circle of purification, and the amethyst crystal to focus the energies needed to break the binding. He also took the silver charm Mrs. Holloway had given him, clutching it as a talisman against the darker forces he might encounter. As midnight approached, Michael made his way back to the mansion under the light of a full moon, which cast the landscape in a ghostly silver hue. The mansion loomed before him, more menacing than ever, yet also seeming to beckon him to fulfill his fateful role. He set up in the seance room, placing the candles in a circle around him and sprinkling salt at the perimeter to secure a sacred space. With the crystal ball at the center of the table and the amethyst crystal in front of him, he began the incantations. The words felt strange on his lips, a language he didn't know but somehow understood. As he chanted, the candles flared, and a wind seemed to rise from nowhere, circling the room, stirring the old dust into swirling patterns. Shadows danced along the walls, forming shapes that were human and yet not human, their movements sinuous and urgent. Suddenly, the room temperature dropped, and a feeling of immense pressure filled the air, as if the mansion itself was bearing down on him, trying to crush his spirit. Michael's voice wavered, but he pressed on, repeating the incantations with increasing confidence. His mind focused solely on the task, pushing through the fear and the supernatural phenomena that sought to deter him. As the ritual neared its climax, the crystal began to glow, pulsing with a light that was at once terrifying and mesmerizing. The wind howled louder, the shadows grew darker, and Michael felt the veil between the worlds thinning, the spirits of the mansion stirring, ready to be released or to resist. The air crackled with energy as Michael's voice crescendoed, the ancient words of the ritual echoing through the seance room. The crystal's glow intensified, casting eerie, dancing lights over the walls, which now seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The wind inside the room swirled violently, causing the candle flames to bend and flicker wildly, yet they did not extinguish. As the ritual reached its peak, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. The oppressive weight that had been bearing down on Michael lifted suddenly, replaced by a profound stillness that was almost more terrifying in its silence. The shadows ceased their frantic dance, coalescing into the figure of a man at the edge of the circle of salt. It was Jonathan Alder, his spectral form grim and formidable, his eyes burning with a mix of rage and sorrow. "You seek to undo what has been done," Jonathan's voice boomed, filling the room with its resonance. But do you comprehend the nature of what you unleash? Michael, though frightened, stood his ground. I seek to free the spirits bound here, to give peace to those you've trapped in your grief and madness. Jonathan's spectral form seemed to waver, his anger battling with the evident pain that etched his ethereal features. I sought only to protect us from the beyond, to bind us together against the darkness I unwittingly invited into this house. But my actions have only prolonged our torment. The room fell silent again as Jonathan's confession hung in the air. Eleanor's spirit then appeared beside him, her presence gentle and soothing compared to the intense energy of her husband. She reached out to him, her hand passing through his form but somehow seeming to provide comfort. "Eleanor," Jonathan murmured, his voice softening. "I have wronged you and our children, trapped in my own fear and obsession." Eleanor turned to Michael, her expression filled with a sad determination. "Complete the ritual, Michael. Free us all, including Jonathan. We must all move on for healing to begin." With renewed resolve, Michael turned back to the ritual, reciting the final incantations with a clear voice. As he spoke, he scattered the amethyst crystals around the circle, each fragment shimmering with light as it settled on the floor. The room filled with a blinding light as the ritual concluded, the energy so intense that Michael had to shield his eyes. The wind died down abruptly, the candles snuffed out as if by an unseen breath, and then all was quiet. As his eyes adjusted to the sudden darkness, Michael realized he was no longer in the seance room. He was standing outside, in front of the mansion, under the clear night sky. The oppressive feel of the mansion was gone, replaced by a peaceful stillness. Turning to look at the house, he saw no dark shadows or eerie lights. Alder Mansion seemed just a normal, albeit old and decrepit, house. The spirits of Jonathan and Eleanor Alder, along with all those bound to the mansion, had been released. As dawn broke, Michael felt an overwhelming relief mixed with exhaustion. The night's events had drained him, but he had done what he had set out to do. He had faced unimaginable horrors, had spoken with spirits, and had ended a centuries-old haunting. The sun's rays brought a warmth that felt like a final seal of approval on his actions. As the sun rose over Thornfield, casting long shadows across the landscape, Michael stood outside Alder Mansion, watching the light play across its now benign facade. The oppressive aura that had once clung to the mansion like a shroud was gone, replaced by an almost palpable sense of release and peace. It was as if the house itself had been holding its breath, now finally allowed to exhale. Exhausted yet exhilarated by the night's events, Michael felt a profound connection to the history he had helped resolve. He had not only witnessed the supernatural but had played a crucial role in rectifying a centuries-old wrong. The reality of this would take time to fully sink in, but he knew this experience would forever alter his perception of life and the afterlife. Before leaving the mansion for the last time, Michael took a final walk through its halls. The interior, which had once felt like a labyrinth designed to trap and confuse, now seemed just a series of empty rooms. The chill and the shadows had dissipated, leaving only the quiet solitude of a structure long past its prime. As he exited the front door, he turned back to look at the portrait of Eleanor and Jonathan Alder, which now hung straight and solemn in the foyer. Their painted eyes no longer held a spectral plea but seemed to look on with a dignified gratitude. Returning to the Thornfield Inn, Michael found the villagers gathered for their morning routines, yet the air buzzed with a curious energy. Word of his nocturnal activities had spread, and his return was met with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Mrs. Holloway approached him, her expression a complex tapestry of concern and respect. "You've done it, haven't you? The mansion feels different today," she said, peering closely at him as if to read the truth on his face. Michael nodded, feeling the weight of fatigue pulling at his bones. "It's over," he confirmed. "The spirits are released. The Alders, and all the others, are free." The news settled over the inn like a soft cloak. Whispers turned into conversations, the tone lighter than it had been in decades. Michael realized that the village, much like the mansion, had been under the shadow of the Alder legacy. His actions had lifted this veil, giving both the spirits and the villagers a new beginning. In the days that followed, Michael documented his experiences, his notes evolving into a manuscript that felt more like a testament than a tale. His nights were no longer plagued by nightmares, but were instead filled with a thoughtful contemplation of the mysteries of existence and the afterlife. As he prepared to leave Thornfield, a sense of accomplishment mixed with a surreal sense of detachment. He had touched another realm, changed the fabric of a haunted history, and would now return to a world where such experiences were rare and unbelievable. Driving away from Thornfield, Michael looked in his rearview mirror, half expecting to see Alder Mansion looming in the distance. But there was only the road and the horizon. He smiled slightly, a man changed by his ordeal, wiser and more aware of the thin veils between worlds. His journey had begun with a dare and ended with a deliverance, a story he would carry with him forever, a story that would whisper in the quiet moments, reminding him of the night he walked with spirits.